So last week, as you know, we started this new series, the 7 Deadly Sins, and you may be curious as to where did that come from. And the series that we do here, everything is we base it off of a team gathering and not just studying what the sermons are going to be, even in putting some of these sermons together. But this one, we gathered a crew together and started talking through our spring, our first of the year series. And I think it was Jordan that brought up and said, how about let's do the 7 deadly sins? And Junior thought it came out of Proverbs. He thought it was these 6 things does the Lord hate. Yes, 7 are abomination unto him. You maybe thought it was that as well, but it's not. And somebody else thought it was the movie. There was like a movie 10, 20 years ago called The 7 Deadly Sins, that's where it came from. No, actually, this it goes back into history, all the way back into the 4th century with this guy named Evagrius Ponticus. And you're going to want to remember that name. That'll be on the quiz later on. He was a 4th century monk. And, I know sometimes when we see pictures like this, we just write it off, it's Catholic, we're not going to pay attention to him. Actually, 4th century, this is very early on, even when Christianity, early in the days when Christianity had been illegal just before that and had been legalized. But this guy, he was quite a mind. And he was reading where Jesus went out into the desert and was tempted by the devil. And so he decided he was going to go off into the desert, went out into the extreme elements, tougher than Bear Grylls, and he went after it. He said, I'm going to go out there, and I'm just going to spend some solitude and meditating and praying, reading scripture. And as he's doing this, he starts jotting down notes, and he came up with this book. In fact, I love the title, A Monastic Handbook for Combating Demons. That's going to be the title of my next book, in fact. So cool sounding. But in that book were these 7 deadly sins. Now, over the centuries, it was updated. There were some minor changes. Different theologians, in fact, some major theologians spoke into them, Gregory the Great and Thomas Aquinas. But there's a biblical reason to identify these sins that we're talking about as deadly sins. They've killed a lot of marriages. They've killed a lot of parent-child relationships, work environments, ministries, and yes, people's lives. And so what we're doing with this series is what we would call a systematic theology of sin. Usually what we do at the Bridge is we do what we call biblical theology. That is, we'll take a book of the Bible and we'll go through that book chapter by chapter, paragraph by paragraph, even verse by verse. And sometimes we do systematic theology, which is thematic or topical, and it's still extremely beneficial. We thought it was a great way for us to kick off 2023 by inventorying ourselves, to identify those things that could kill us this year, that would kill our relationships, our work environments, our ministries, our families, but particularly that leave us in spiritual danger. So the passage we're going to look at, again, is from Jesus' teaching, and it's one of his stories, in Matthew chapter 20. So if you want to grab your Bibles and take a look at this, Matthew chapter 20, we're not projecting these verses, and so you're going to want to follow along. If you don't have a Bible of your own, just grab one of those blue hardcover Bibles that we've got. It's page 825 in those blue hardcover Bibles. Otherwise, you can turn on your phone and turn the sound off and follow along this way. So, and if you're watching at home, we want you to grab your Bibles as well. It's important for you to be able to study along with us and not just have the sound on in the background, but let's get into this. So Matthew chapter 20, beginning in verse 1, and let's pray. Father, this is your word. We believe it is true, and we receive what it says. In the name of Jesus, open our hearts and engage our minds. Amen. A couple of weeks ago, actually on this day, I believe it'd be 3 weeks to the day, I was riding a motorcycle in Africa. And the guy that was on behind me, he was a pastor, one of the coolest guys I've ever met. His English name is Luis. And the guy was just unbelievable in what he was doing in his community. Went into a community that no Christian had ever gone into before. He went in there to form friendships with the people in that community. It was heavily Muslim. For the most part, in this whole area, Christians were persecuted by the local governments, not nationally, but by the local governments. But he just went in there and started making friends. Everybody in the community, in fact, I met some of his neighbors. Everybody in his community calls him pastor. That's all they know him as. And he had taken in a couple of families that were persecuted. One family he brought in, it was a distant family member. They had lost their home. Landlord wouldn't rent to them because he found out that they had received Christ or now claimed to be Christians. They had gotten baptized. That's usually when the people would get cut off. And he took them into his home. And these are small homes that they live in. There was another woman that lived in the community, and she had She had gone to a witch doctor because she had an ailment, and the witch doctor raped her. She got pregnant, and her husband wouldn't take her back because of it. And now she was, in his mind, that she was dirty, wouldn't allow her back in the house. And so he took her into his home. The child was born in his home. Because she didn't have a husband anymore, she named the child Pastor, because that's the only name she knew him by. And I got to hold little Pastor, a little 6-month-old baby. But the guy is just so cool, so involved. And in fact, this is him right there. We just had a blast with him. But he took us into the little villages. And Africa is the way you would imagine Africa to be. It is where most people, nobody has indoor plumbing. Very few people would have indoor plumbing. And they didn't have electricity. Most of the homes did not even have electricity. There'd be a community center where there would be power coming in and where they would get water, but they would have to walk for their water. And half-naked babies running all over the place and laughing and playing and all of that. But we were in this village called Soma, and we were looking actually for a pig that they were going to slaughter for our January 1st meal. And he said, as he's looking around this community, he goes, the thing is 5 years ago, all these people were a lot happier than they are now. I said, what? I'm thinking, okay, I could see some reasons that they would not be happy. There's Sharia law that they have to deal with. The kids, all this time when we're talking, these kids come running out. They called us Tubab. Tubab is their word for white man. They'd never seen white skin and straight hair before. They were really enamored with Junior's long, straight hair. They had never seen anything like that before. So they were calling us Tubab and stuff. And I'm thinking, man, well, okay, recent war, maybe local mosques are introducing the Sharia law and it's starting to take over more and more. In fact, some of these young girls are being sold to old perverts. Maybe it's one of these reasons. But he said, no. He said, it's actually about 5 years ago, a large corporation came in and gave away free phones and introduced cellular service. And so now they all have internet and they see what Americans and the rest of the Western world, what they live like. Now before that, their imagination had been triggered. They'd been hearing stories about all this stuff, but now they see firsthand what other people have that they don't have. And we think, well, that's really sad. And yet, the same thing is happening in us. I know some of it's social media, but in reality, there is this envy that entangles our hearts, chokes our spirit. And it might use social media, but it doesn't need social media to do this. This is a problem within us. When there's severed relationships or friendships that are broken down, family tension, the culprit at the core of it all is often envy. Though we rarely see it ourselves, and most of us would deny it, that, well, that's not really a problem for me. Most of us think that way, but envy is a real problem. Envy kills community. It implodes families. It tears us apart from our neighbors. And there are people that we don't talk to or talk to as much. Often the problem is envy. At the core of a lot of financial struggles, envy, spending to keep up. And whether big or little, there is at least a little of it in all of us. And today, Jesus invites us to confront the deadly sin that has crept in. So let's start with verse 1 of Matthew chapter 20. And Jesus is telling a story. He says, for the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers in his vineyard. Now, master of the house, that just means farmer. And he's the one that, and everybody would have been familiar with this. They had seen vineyards. Because anytime they went traveling, there were vineyards everywhere. And this was a major staple crop for them in Israel. So this would have been the farmer who was in charge, who was the one in charge of putting the seeds in or doing the cultivating and doing the watering and then bringing the harvest in. And so during those heavy times, he would need a lot of laborers. And what they would do, the process of hiring, is there was a place in town, and I'm familiar with this because back when I was in college, I sat out for a year, went down to Texas, worked on the oil field. I actually worked as a roughneck on a couple of oil rigs. And the way to get the jobs on an oil rig is that you would go to the place in that community, in this particular town that I was in, it was a pool hall. early in the morning, it wasn't open. You'd either get hired in the morning or you would be there after the workday, and the foreman would come through and he would pick his workers for the next day and tell you where to meet at. And it was usually right there as well. So I'd go there early in the morning, and I would go there in the evening, and I would hang out until eventually, and he'd go around and say, what can you do? And most of the guys were lead tongs, which was like the first job that you would get on an oil rig. And I had done a little bit of what they called throwing chain. I remember saying, I can throw chain. He goes, okay, you're on. And, had me get in the pickup truck and go. So, I got that job. That's how they would do it in the ancient world. There was a place where they would meet when they were looking for work, the regular laborers. And so he goes out there, and he's going to pick up some laborers. That's verse 1. So a farmer went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard. And I've got a denarius. A denarius is it's a small copper-colored coin that a lot of people view it as looks like a penny, but it was the average day's wage for any laborer. Someone who works out in the field, they would get paid a denarius a day, and that was typical for them. And so he said, I'll give you a denarius a day. That was agreeable. They said, okay, that works good for us. So they agreed to this. Verse 3, and going out about the third hour, so this was the first hour first when he got the first group. That day would start at 6 in the morning, shortly after sunup. So the third hour, what time would that be? Well, you guys are you're either asleep, you don't want to talk, or you just are really bad at math. So that'd be what time? 9. Oh, very good. So third hour, 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said to them, you go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right, I will give you. He doesn't even give them an amount, doesn't make an agreement with them, but they're willing to do it. Now, they would not have expected a full denarius because that was for those that worked the full day. Verse 5, so they went, going out again about the 6th hour, what would the 6th hour be? That'd be noon. That's halfway into the day. And the 9th hour, he did the same. So 9th hour, that'd be 3 o'clock. And it's like, man, they're going back over and over and over. And have you ever done anything like that where you had to keep going back for something? And I can imagine what it was. He needed the help, and it wasn't getting done fast enough, so he'd go back and get some more to help. And I had a project going one Saturday. I wound up going to ACE 4 times for that same project and keep going back to the same thing. I'm sure you've done it as well. So he has to keep going back. Verse 6, in about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing. So 11th hour, that's 5 o'clock. The day would typically be done at 6. They would really work from sunup to sundown, but that would be typical, 6 to 6, maybe 7 o'clock at the latest. But the 11th hour, this is 5 o'clock. They've got like an hour's worth of work in them. So in about the 11th hour, he went out and found others, and he said to them, why do you stand here idle all day? And they said to him, because no one has hired us. And he said to them, you go into the vineyard too. Sun's getting low. We got to get these grapes in. We got to get going. So he went back again. You got the 6 o'clock crew, the 9 o'clock crew, the 12 o'clock crew, the 3 o'clock crew, and now the 5 o'clock crew. Which brings us to verse 8. And when the evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first. And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. They worked an hour. And they got a full day's wage. Now, you can imagine the people that work the full day. They're like, we hit the jackpot. They get a denarius. I can't imagine what we're going to get. Verse 10, now when those hired first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. Now, they were okay with a denarius at first, but now they're not. Verse 11, and on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, these last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat. Now, seriously, can you blame them? Of course. Well, let's be fair for a second. I get it. You get it too. If you were to work on a deal at work and you're the one staying late at the office, you're missing your kids' games, you're working on this deal for months, and right before the deal closes, your supervisor adds people to the team to push the deal through, and then the whole team, even the last minute guys, they split the deal, the bonus that comes through, they split it. You'd be ticked. You did the work. You invested more. That's what they're feeling. Verse 13. But he, remember who that he is. This is the master of the house. This is the farmer. He replied to one of them, "Friend, I'm doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give this last worker as I gave to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity?" So the last will be first and the first last. Now, the fact is, most of us side with the all-day workers. But that would put us in opposition to not only Jesus and what he was teaching here, but God the Father, who is the master of the house in this story. And that God, our Creator, he doesn't care about fair. In fact, if he did, we would all have a lot less. And he distributes gifts and blessings as he chooses to. Now, while we hold dear our understanding of human equality, all being created in God's image, let's face it, we haven't all received from God equal gifting. I mean, I am way better looking than most of you. Kidding. Truth, actually, Hayden and Jansen, man, they have been gifted way beyond me and way beyond most of us here. That's just the fact of the matter. That he distributes as he distributes. And that produces a lot of blessing in life for all of us. Some of us here have been gifted with financial resources. Maybe I shouldn't have said some of us. Some of you. And a lot of you have been gifted well beyond the average person. And all of us here have been gifted beyond the rest of the world. I mean, when we're talking about financial resources, we have been so gifted way beyond the rest of the world. Even developed Western nations would love to enjoy our standard of living. But we have trouble enjoying what we have been given because of our tendency to always look around and compare ourselves up. When it comes to our weaknesses, we compare ourselves with other people that we think are worse than us. But when it comes to our resources, we compare ourselves to people who are better off than us. That's why no one ever thinks that they're rich, because they're always comparing themselves to someone who has more money. But I would venture to say that somebody has something that you want. They have the marriage you want, the job you want. Maybe they get the clients you want, or they have the house that you want, or they might have the body that you want, or their kids behave the way you want your kids to behave, or they might get more attention, or they're just better at making friends. There's someone who has something that you want, and it hurts. So our response is either removing ourselves from them, distancing ourselves because it just hurts to be around them, or we devalue what they have. We downplay their skill. We downplay their image. Well, they're not that good, or they're just lucky, or they just got handed that. Downplaying them, it gives us a temporary reprieve of the pain that we feel because we're comparing ourselves to them. But we don't see it for what it is. And I think envy has a hold on us far more than we recognize. So let's go after this. We're going to do what we did yesterday as well. And we're going to look at, last week as well. We're going to look at the symptoms. What are symptoms of envy? And the first one is a dislike for someone. I'll bet some of you don't like someone, and you don't even know why. You just don't like them. But if you were to dig around enough and be honest with yourself, you'd find out that you don't like them because they're ahead of you in some way. They have something that you don't have that you wish you had. They were given something that you weren't given. They work less, but make more. Or people seem to gravitate to them. They make friends easier. They just always look good. And so your emotional response is, well, I just don't like him. I just don't like her. But if you were to examine yourself and be honest, the reason you don't like that person is you're jealous of them. And it seems like the closer you get to them, the worse you feel about yourself. And I know I may be hitting on some tender spots here, but I'm I'm going to keep going after this. I only know this because I deal with my own envious nature. So what happens, and come on, let's be honest. We don't want to admit to our jealousy. Very few people ever admit that they have an envy problem. So instead, we just distance ourselves from those that we are jealous of. And then we write them off by saying things like, well, he's just too nice. I heard a woman say that one time. She goes, I just don't like her. She's too nice. I said, what? Oh, she's so perfect. She's just so nice. She's too nice. And I wanted to say, well, you should probably hang out with her a little bit more so that she could learn how to be a jerk like you. But I didn't. Or we say things like, well, she's just too pretty. Plasticky. I don't feel comfortable around him. Just too all put together. He's too much the center of attention. People are always around him. It annoys me. And so what happens is we stand on the sidelines and we criticize. Instead of admitting to envy in our hearts, we write people off and come up with ways of excusing it. And you see if there's something about that person that gets to you and you just can't put a finger on it, chances are you're probably dealing with some envy. Instead of dealing with that in your heart, what you've done is you've masked it with, well, I just can't close to them. I don't know, I just don't like them. I don't feel comfortable around this person. But if you dig deeper, it's because they're a reflection of what you are not, the reminder of what you don't have but want. And in our minds, we start to blame them as if they're the problem. We start finding stuff about them. We become their critic. And this was the religious leaders with Jesus. They were critics of his because people loved him more. And we do the same thing with others. I mean, pastors will even do this with each other. We just won't like another pastor. Their preaching isn't good enough. We'll get critical and put them down. But the real reason is there's a lot of envy even among pastors. And we all do this. And I would venture to say most of us have someone we don't like and don't have good reasoning. We just don't like them. But if we were to sit in it long enough, we'd be staring at our own envy. So that's the first symptom, is a dislike for someone. Second symptom is a focus on fairness. Now, focus on fairness is often a front for envy. And we live in a culture that is obsessed with fairness. But I don't think fairness was even a thing in the Garden of Eden. I mean, God never promised absolute fairness because he's not a boring God. He loves variety. For example, I got 3 kids. This is not them any longer. But of these 3 kids, man, they were so radically different. 2 of them were well-behaved. 2 of them were well-behaved. And one of them was a really good athlete and was just unnaturally tall. We don't know how that even got into the family, but somehow it got there. And Erica, she was a great dancer. Junior loved sports. Erica wanted to love sports, but she would be throwing the ball and wouldn't know what to do with it. Brock, if he was throwing the ball, he didn't know that he was throwing the ball. He loved mechanical things and could take anything apart and put it back together and was just really good with that kind of stuff. They're all very different. We learned early on that we weren't going to treat them the same. And so for us, it was always a really big deal that we were against fairness. And we never wanted to hear, that's not fair. I've always felt when children start saying that's not fair a lot, that means that parents are catering to it. They're feeling badly, maybe feeling guilty about something not being fair. And what the kids are doing is they're manipulating by using it. Instead, we would always say, you're an individual. We treat you the way God wants us to treat you according to who you are. And sometimes you need more time, and sometimes she needs more time. So you don't want to introduce that concept of fairness with these kids. And they're still very radically different, as you can see. And even today, we treat them very differently because they are individuals. And I don't know, if my 3 kids were all the same, they wouldn't be nearly as much fun. And a lot of the enjoyment that we get, and we love being together as a family, for one, we enjoy picking out differences. And my kids just seem to have a knack for this. And some of it is encouragement, and some of it is just having some good fun picking on each other with laughter. The one that gets picked on the most at this point is me, because I've got my wife joining in on it as well. And oftentimes is the ringleader on this stuff. But that variety is such a beautiful thing. When we get focused on fairness, we wind up losing out. And we do this at work as well. That's not fair. I'm the one who deserves that job, that raise, or that project. We say things like, I just want everything to be fair. And I say, no, you don't. Because if we wanted fair, we'd give away most of our radical wealth to the billions of people around the world who have way less than us and then live like the rest of the world. That would be fair, but we don't want that fair. We don't want fair. We want more. That's the problem. We want more. Because we look around and we see others with more. So we want it. And claim we want fair, but no, we want more. The real problem is in our hearts. It's that deadly sin called envy. Hit me a couple of weeks ago when we were on our way back from Africa. It was a long journey. I had to fly east to go west, and it was a tough journey. Junior was still sick. He had gotten the stomach flu, and he was not feeling well. We paid for an upgrade just to get the bulkhead. So it was regular economy coach, but we wanted the bulkhead just so there was some leg room. And my bigger thing wasn't so much leg room. I got short little legs, but for me it was more about Junior was sick. I didn't want him barfing on me. I wanted him to have quick access to be able to get out of there and get to the bathroom. But of course it's more comfortable for all of us to have that bulkhead. And when we got on the plane, we had picked it out online where it showed where the bulkhead was, got on the plane, and our row was the next row back on the actual plane. So we paid more money to get an upgrade, paid more money for a middle seat in regular coach with no leg room. Oh, did that bother me? And I even talked to the flight attendant, or that she brought the agent over, and she said, no, you paid more money, but you paid for this seat. I said, why would I pay for this seat? This isn't a good seat. But that's what I had, and there's this whole row of people in front of me who had my seat. And oh, did that bother me? I mean, that is not fair. I mean, why does that lady with a baby get my seat? Which was true. It was a lady with a baby. And then I remembered the people that we had just left. Oh, that's not fair. Do I want fair? I mean, I'm on a jet that's flying 600 miles an hour, 40,000 feet in the air. I'm on my way home to a house that's probably 6 times the size of any house that any of those people have. I've got a nice car and a truck. I've got central heat and air conditioning. I have an indoor bathroom. None of my friends from Africa had their own indoor bathrooms. I have safety and freedom. My friends from Africa had none of those things. I didn't want fair. I wanted more. My problem was envy of the people that had better seats than me. And what's funny is more doesn't actually cure envy. If you suddenly get that extra leg room or that vehicle or fit into that size, or if you got that office, you'd still be envious of someone else because it's in your heart. You'd get more and pull ahead, and then you'd identify someone else who's ahead of you, and envy would kick right back in because we don't want fair, we want more, and not even that will rid us of envy because there's always bigger fish. There's always someone with a bigger house, a nicer car, more successful kids, a better body. Even if you were to pull ahead, envy still sticks with us. And most of us have experienced that. Let's actually take this a step further because I've completely 100% conquered this in my life, and I want to share my new knowledge with you. And I'm just kidding. I'm doing this right with you. Here's the dilemma for all of us. When I envy, I think you're my problem. What you have bothers me. I don't like where you're at compared to where I'm at. You're better, you're happier, you're more liked than me. You're my problem, but you can't solve my problem. You're my problem, but you can't solve my problem. There's nothing you could do to solve this problem. There's nothing you can actually do to feel better. What's the only thing that you could do to make me feel better about my envy? Fail. That's it. Fail. This is where it gets so sick and twisted. When we're envious, what often makes us feel better? When that person fails. And you know what I'm talking about. Seeing people on Facebook we envied. Oh, she doesn't look so good anymore. Makes you feel better. You know what I'm talking about. Oh, that football star, man, he was the jock. He got all these awards. Now I see him and he's fat and bald and makes you feel better. That's sick. But it's often why we feel. Why? Because we think their misfortune is leveling the playing field. Them failing made it more fair. Is this hitting close to home? Well, one more symptom. It is eyes on others. Had the laborers never known what the other laborers, the full-day laborers, if they hadn't known what the 1 hour laborers were given, they'd have been totally fine with it. Which is why a lot of companies have this policy. In fact, we have this policy for our staff, not to share what anybody makes with any of the other staff members. And there's good reason for that, because it's a natural tendency for all of us to start thinking, well, how come I don't get that? It's the villages in Africa getting phones, seeing what all of us have. You ever scroll and see that popular, the picture, feet on the beach picture? You know what I'm talking about? Blue water in the background, feet up on the lounge chair. They're holding some fancy pants drink. Hashtag blessed life. And it's January and you're frozen. Your car's filled with salt. And you look at that picture and you're like, man, I hope a hurricane comes. I hate that ocean. I hate that sand. I hate your stupid feet. Because what happens is we live with our eyes on others, always looking around, and it stirs envy. So let's get to the treatment. What's the treatment for this? Now, first of all, number one here, celebrate others. And it's this is such a biblical principle that the way to overcome a problem is you do the opposite. The way to overcome a sin issue is you do the opposite of this. The way to overcome a habit is you form a habit that's the opposite of the old habit that you've been doing. It's the put off and put on process that Paul talks about. So celebrate others, and not just others, not just the ones you like. Celebrate those people who tend to surface your envy. Celebrate the ones that you are most jealous of, and do so out loud. Man, you are so good at making friends. I should just watch and learn. Congrats on the promotion, guy. You had a great idea. I wish I would have thought of it. Or your wedding. It's so exciting. Celebrate that person. I know you may die a little inside when you celebrate someone out loud, but it's that envious part of you that is dying. You're killing envy by celebrating that person. You say, yeah, but that wouldn't be sincere. I wouldn't be being genuine. Sure, that can be absolutely sincere. I mean, to tell her that she looks good in that dress. Doesn't she look good in that dress? That's why you don't like her. Telling how she looks good in that dress is sincere, even though you don't want to say it. Didn't he do a good job? Yeah, it's why he bothers you. And by the way, it's never your job to keep anybody else humble. You leave that up to God and leave it up to that person. You can be sincere in celebrating someone else. It's just your heart is messed up and it's resisting doing the right thing. Celebrating even when you don't want to is like speaking into your heart, saying, hey, we're no longer led by feelings of envy. We're going to do the right thing, and I'm killing envy, even though it's painful. So you celebrate. The second treatment, realize your issue is with the giver, not the recipient. In a story that Jesus tells, who did the laborers have a problem with? Who was it? You think it was the all-day laborers. They had a problem with the 11th hour laborers. No, they didn't. They didn't have a problem with the 11th hour laborers. Who's their problem with? It was the master of the house. And in this story, who's the master of the house? God. And so it goes with us. When we envy, we take issue not really with the person that we are jealous of. Our issue is with the giver. Envy essentially says, God owes me. what he gave that other person. That's the ugliness of envy. This is why we cannot worship when we are filled with envy. It cuts us off from him being able to really show gratitude and worship to him for his goodness, because we've got a problem with what he's given us. Deep down, we know and we believe, we know God gave this to them and not us, and we believe God owes us because look what he gave them. He got that promotion. She's got those friends. He's got that wife. She's got that body. They get all these opportunities. They married into that and inherited wealth, and God owes that to me. Now, we don't say that, but that's really what's going on. And like it or not, this has nothing to do with skinny people or rich people or smart people or people with more friends. This has nothing to do with them. Our problem with envy is with God, who gave us what he gave us and gave them what he gave them. Because let's face it, God could have given you a different family. He could have given you more opportunities. He could have given you more money or better health. He could have placed you in that position. But when he was setting all this up, he decided to give you a tougher path to walk. And that's not fair. My granddaughter, Nora, darling little girl, some of you know, she was born with a cataract in her eye and has already had a couple of surgeries, removed the cataract, and she has to have a lens that they put on top. But there's been some problems lately because the pressure is building up under that eye, and she has glaucoma, which could lead to blindness. And so they're using drops right now to try to take care of that pressure. Those drops didn't work, so they've changed the prescription to a drop that stings now. And the next step, if this drop doesn't work, there'll be surgery. But even with the surgery, the doctor's saying sometimes it helps. So she may lose her eyesight, and she knows that. And Junior sat down and talked with her and just said, because she seems so happy and she's okay with everything. And said, is it bothering you when people ask you about your eyes and we're talking about this? Is this bothering you? I can't believe this is a 6-year-old. And she said, no, Daddy, because this is God's plan for me and it'll be okay. Man, I wish the rest of us adults could view what we're lacking and what God gives others in the same way. In fact, in Daniel 4, the prophet writes, God does as he pleases, and nobody can say, what have you done? He distributes wealth and opportunity to whoever he pleases. He's God. A big step in untangling ourselves from envy is embracing just that. When I'm envious, my issue is with God, and so instead of projecting that frustration on this person or that person, I need to bring it to God and realize he's God, I'm not, and I have to be okay with that. Now, I know it doesn't taste good, especially without the third treatment, but this third treatment, this one, is the biggest. Remind yourself of the gospel. When my wife and I were on vacation, end of August, the beginning of September, we stopped off at a couple of places that I'd been when I was young, and the one is my hometown that I grew up in, La Crosse, Wisconsin, and had a lot of fun. One of the things we did there is we did the river cruise, the La Crosse Queen. It's been there since I was a little boy and always wanted to go on that boat, but was never able to, and so we did it together. But when we went on this river cruise, we bought the tickets and didn't realize that there were two different sets of tickets. One set of tickets is for a dinner. It's a dinner cruise, and the other set is just to sit there and look around. Well, I was totally fine with looking around because if you've ever been to La Crosse, Wisconsin, it's beautiful. It's just a beautiful area. It's a wonderful time of the year, and we were going by a lot of my old boyhood places that I used to camp out and have fun, and so I was looking forward to it. Thought it was going to be a blast, but when I got on board, I realized that they had the second set of tickets meant that we could have had a nice steak dinner as well. And I'm looking around, and there's all these other people. They're getting served a steak dinner, and I'm just sitting there. Now, there's beautiful scenery around me the whole time, but I didn't see any of it because I was just thinking, I should have gotten that steak dinner. And I'm seeing all these other people eating that good dinner while they're on the dinner cruise, and I'm just on the cruise. That's it. Well, it was shortly after that, we went on another cruise, and it was this one here. No, that was not. Shortly after that, I was reading an article about a couple about our age that were flying. It was over Lake Michigan, and he had engine failure. They had to ditch in Lake Michigan, which is a very dangerous thing because Lake Michigan is freezing cold even in the middle of the summertime. So they landed safe enough to where, of course, the plane started sinking. They had to get out. Fortunately, they had life vests on and got out, but the water was so freezing it wasn't long, and the body temperature started dropping. He had intentionally landed as close to a boat as he could get, and it was a dinner cruise. So it was a nicer dinner cruise, in fact, than the dinner cruise that I missed out on. And they were hauled up on board of this beautiful boat. And these people on this dinner cruise, they were dressed to the hilt. I mean, this was really a nice dinner cruise. They're sitting around beautiful leather chairs. They're eating lobster and steak, and it was a wonderful dinner. And they sat down on the ground, and they're sitting, they've got their blankets on, and they're shivering. And they said, "Hey, how come we don't get a steak and lobster dinner?" Well, they didn't do that. They were so grateful that their lives were rescued. They just sat there shivering, saying, "Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you." If we remind ourselves of the gospel, we come to realize very quickly that every one of us were headed to an eternity separated from God, condemned. And it was because of the giver who gave his son to rescue us, to pull us out of hell, and to give to us heaven. That ought to change everything in our mindset. Who cares where this person is at? Who cares who has what? I was on my way to hell. My giver gave his son to die for me and gave me heaven. How could I want more? Remind yourself of the gospel. Well, so what? 2 questions. Who are you jealous of? Now, seriously, not who is jealous of you. Who are you jealous of? A coworker, a family member. Who do you have a problem with? And when you are truly honest, it's because there's envy there. And then what steps will you take to kill your envy? I'm just going to give you a couple of moments in quietness. You can bow your head if you want. You can just stare at the screen if you want to do that. But I want to give you a couple of steps to really examine this sincerely. What's been going on in your heart when it comes to what God has given others that he hasn't given you? It's a deadly sin. It'll kill your relationships. It'll kill your joy, your happiness. But worst of all, it'll destroy you spiritually. You cannot worship with envy. You just can't. Father, I know that we needed to hear this tonight. I thank you for the story that Jesus told. It was such a great lesson in this for us personally right now. Your goodness to us, your faithfulness, what we sang about earlier. So good. But more than anything else, it was the gift of your son. That's what matters. Calvary. Jesus' death on our behalf, his resurrection from the dead, providing new, resurrected, eternal life for us. That's the greatest gift that could ever be given, and you've given it to us. How could we ever feel as though we're not getting enough from you? So help us to live with that joy, that gratitude, that you have been so eternally good to us, even before our eternal state has begun. in Jesus' name.